For reasons that utterly escape everyone involved, you're listening to a bipolar, a schizophrenic, and a podcast. Here are your hosts, Gabe Howard and Michelle Hammer.
Welcome to a very serious episode of a bipolar, a schizophrenic, and a podcast. My name is Gabe Howard. I live with bipolar disorder.
Hi, I'm Michelle, and I'm schizophrenic.
I was going to tell everybody you were dead. That was my whole plan. I was going to be like, sadly, Michelle is no longer with us.
That's not funny, Gabe.
I mean, it's a little funny. Why do you assume that you're dead like in the no longer exist sense? Maybe you're just dead to me.
No.
People who have listened to the show are fully expecting one of us to kill the other. So I think that at some point you got to give the people what they want.
I don't think that's what the people want.
I brought up death because, death quickly leads into religion, and religion is one of those things that is sort of a double-edged sword for people. Because a lot of people struggling with mental health issues, living with mental illness, whether depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, anxiety, they talk about how their faith has led them to wellness. So we want to acknowledge that right away before we trash religion for the next 20 minutes. Because there's this other side where religion has caused a lot of damage. This is a buffet. Take what you want and leave the rest.
Is this a Chinese buffet? Because I like a Chinese buffet with a Mongolian wok.
Okay, but do you eat every single thing on the Chinese buffet?
Well, no, because I'm allergic to shellfish.
Okay, so there are things on the Chinese buffet that you don't like.
That's right.
Do you stand in front of that thing and start screaming that you hate it? Or do you just focus your attention on the items that you like?
Oh, like the chicken lo mein. I'm all about that.
Right. So isn't it funny that on the internet, nobody goes for the proverbial chicken lo mein. They all stand in front of the shellfish screaming. And that brings me around to my point that if religion is working for you, if spirituality is working for you, if you are living better in spite of a mental health challenge, utilizing religion, spirituality, etc., then hey, this show is not for you. But there are many people who are hindered by religion in their recovery.
Let's do it, Gabe. I think we should chat about it.
Let's establish some ground rules. First, I was raised Catholic. I am now an atheist. You, Michelle, as were raised Jewish, and I have no idea what you are now. New York, I guess.
I'm a cultural Jew.
A cultural Jew. What's a cultural Jew?
A cultural Jew is where you really don't celebrate any holidays, but you identify as a Jew and you celebrate holidays, meaning you have food on the holidays.
I can get behind that.
You just don't go to temple anymore.
I am a cultural Catholic because there is not a holiday out there that I will not eat food. In fact, I'm going to become a Catholic Jew so that I can have 2 holidays and I can get double food.
That, you know what? I can agree with that.
Excellent. Do you want to become a Jewish Catholic so that you too can have double food?
Well, I kind of want to celebrate this capitalist Christmas.
I love capitalist Christmas. As you know, I dress like Santa, so I am really into, because Santa is the spokesperson for capitalist Christmas. I mean, nothing says love people like a guy breaking into your house and leaving you shit.
And just yelling ho, ho, ho everywhere. Calling people hoes. Just calling everyone a ho.
Ho, ho, ho.
You're really good at calling people hoes there, Gabe.
Hey, you've heard the hypersexuality episode. It's a thing.
Ho, ho, ho. Can I go around doing that to people? Ho, ho, ho.
I mean, yeah, if you trim up your beard and mustache a little, it's getting a little long.
Hey, fuck you.
From your experience as a person living with schizophrenia and what you have seen in your community, how open is the Jewish faith to the concept of mental illness? What are the teachings? What do they say?
Well, it's interesting. With mental illness and Jewishness, it's kind of a weird kind of a thing because it's kind of like the media plays up the Jews as very anxious and neurotic, and it's a huge Jewish stereotype. And you see it in a lot of films, like they're a neurotic Jew, and it's really just a stereotype. And when I was looking up a lot of things about Jews and mental illness, and I found like studies, and it said that the study found that Jews suffer from certain mental illnesses at higher rates, including like major depression, dysthymia, schizophrenia, phobia, but had lower rates of others, like including alcoholism. And I also saw mental illnesses in Jews and other people can be higher if they've suffered traumatic events in the past. Think about like, the trauma of like maybe the Holocaust, things like that, which could have turned Jews into this more neurotic kind of way. What do you think about that?
I think that you Googled, and it's always fascinating when Michelle Googles, because if you Google long enough, you're going to find out that all Jews have cancer, because all medical conditions lead to cancer on the internet. But I like what you said there about that neurotic Jew, because think of like Woody Allen. And when it comes to famous Jewish people, Woody Allen is a really big example, because I think he plays into the stereotype intentionally. He's always doing these, as you said, stereotypical, neurotic Jewish things. And that probably helped his career a lot in the 70s and 80s. Because after all, if you are the stereotype, then nobody has to be afraid of you. Everybody knows you. And it sort of led to this kind of cutesy caricature. But you're right. In actuality, Woody Allen has a really serious anxiety disorder. Like, how does he leave his house? He's scared of everything. We all saw that as comedy, but in actuality, that's pretty serious, right?
It is serious, but really, it's just a stereotype. He built up a stereotype. Everybody just built that stereotype of these neurotic Jews, and they're all nervous all the time, and they think things are going to go wrong. And even if you watch Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David is all very like, things are going to go wrong. What am I going to say? And he finds himself in these like ridiculous situations where he said things he wasn't supposed to say. Things always go wrong because of Larry David saying the wrong thing in his messed up kind of a mind of who knows what he's going to do, and he says it. You know what I'm saying about Larry David's show? Come on.
Yeah. Oh, no, I completely agree. And if we just look at our relationship, so I'm not Jewish, you are Jewish, and you don't care about anything. Like right before we go on stage, you're like sitting in the back with your feet up, half asleep, and I'm like circling the building at 1,000 miles an hour, just waiting for it to catch on fire. So it really should be the opposite. I should be like calm and laid back and chill, because that's my stereotype. I'm a white male. I have it all put together. And you should be neurotic for a number of stereotypical reasons. Female being at the top, Jewish being second, schizophrenia is a strong third, but you're relatively laid back and relaxed. I never really see you panic.
That's a very good point. I think my panic is more internal. It's more in my head of am I going to mess this up? Is this going to go right? I hope it goes well. But you know what? If it doesn't go well, oh well. But I think I know what I'm going to say. So I hope it does the right thing. If I mess up, I mess up. It happens. It is what it is. I accept everything for what it is. So that's why I'm kind of okay with it.
And that is very, very healthy. But now let's move to more scary topics. If somebody dies by suicide, how does the Jewish faith handle that?
That's a very good question. I don't think that the Jewish faith really likes that too much, but they're not.
Well, I don't think anybody likes suicide. Like I don't think there's a group out there that's pro suicide. But I mean, are you allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery? Are you allowed to have your funeral in a Jewish temple? Do they tell your whole family that you're burning in hell? What's that kind of? Because we're going to get to Christianity in a minute, and there's all kinds of fucked up messages over on that side.
No, you can be buried in a Jewish cemetery if you kill yourself. And that whole thing about tattoos in Jewish cemeteries, that's really just a lie. Have you heard that stereotype, Gabe?
No.
There's this like big lie that if you have a tattoo, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. And that is one of the biggest myths, and it's a huge myth, and people believe it for some reason, and it's a complete lie. Because people have always said, oh no, if you have a tattoo, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. And I've always thought, think about it. The body goes to the cemetery. Do you think they really check the body for tattoos and say, oh no, this body cannot be buried here? Like, that's just the dumbest belief ever. And people have really said that to me. People really believe that, and it's a complete lie.
What if it's a stupid tattoo, though?
Doesn't matter. And because the whole thing is you borrow your body. I don't really get it either. But you borrow your body, therefore you're not supposed to make any permanent things on your body. Yet earrings are allowed.
Well, earrings aren't permanent. You can take them out.
But they leave a hole.
That is very true. Michelle, I don't need to explain to you that Christianity is the biggest religion in America.
Yes.
More people associate with Christianity than any other religion, including people who absolutely have never set foot in a church, will claim Christianity as their religion. And the teachings surrounding mental illness and suicide are scary. And again, to be fair, not every single Christian religion, because there are many of them, share this, but there are some that teach things like, if your loved one died by suicide, they will burn in hell for all eternity, and they cannot have their funeral in this church, and they cannot be buried in your church's cemetery, which is like, I mean, the person's dead, so you're not really doing anything to them. What you're doing is making their families suffer needlessly. And it's just so incredibly cruel.
Yes, that's horrible. Good things Jews don't believe in hell. Woohoo!
Well, but where do you go when you die? Are you able to go to the same place? Does the Jewish faith care how you die? Are there different restrictions based on your death to what happens to you in the heavenly plane or the afterlife? Or does it just not matter? Dead is dead.
Well, from what I understand, there is a purgatory for 1 year. And once you complete your 1 year of purgatory, you then go up to heaven. Everybody goes up to heaven, unless you are a horrible person like Stalin or Hitler, where you go to purgatory and then your soul dissipates and you never make it anywhere else.
What if you're a horrible person like Michelle Hammer? Like, just 1 year in purgatory and you're good?
Well, no, I'm not a horrible person. I would go straight to heaven. You go to heaven, and then you can live again in a new life.
So, like reincarnation, like you'll come back as a dog.
I don't know about a dog, but you can live again as like a human, I believe.
So that means there is a possibility that your grandmother Blanche is out there.
Well, that'd be pretty soon, but yeah, I mean, maybe. Blanche might be living again. Who knows?
All joking aside, the bottom line is, if you die by suicide, the Jewish faith community will support the family. Your funeral stays exactly the same. You're buried in exactly the same place. And the afterlife works exactly the same way. There's no extra teaching surrounding dying by suicide or dying by mental illness in the Jewish faith.
That is what I believe. If I am wrong, I apologize. But that is what I'm pretty sure of. And I did look up a lot of stuff about just, a mental illness in the Torah, and it was very interesting. They were saying things like mental illness can lead to sin, or sinning can lead to mental illness. Hold up one sec, we gotta hear from our sponsor.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp.com. Secure, convenient, and affordable online counseling. All counselors are licensed, accredited professionals. Anything you share is confidential. Schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus chat and text with your therapist whenever you feel it's needed. A month of online therapy often costs less than a single traditional face-to-face session. Go to BetterHelp.com/Psych Central and experience 7 days of free therapy to see if online counseling is right for you. BetterHelp.com/Psych Central.
And in an effort to get a whole bunch of angry letters, we're back talking about religion.
As you know, Michelle, the Jewish faith is a minority in America. The largest faith in America is Christianity. And Christianity comes in all different sects. For example, I'm Catholic, which is a Christian religion. My father is Presbyterian, which is a Christian religion. And Catholics and Presbyterians believe very different things, and they believe a lot of the same things. So it's really difficult to have a conversation about how Christianity feels about suicide, but there are large portions, not the majority, I really don't think, but large enough to cause real damage, that believe that people who die by suicide, who die from their mental illness, cannot get into heaven. They cannot be buried in Christian cemeteries. They cannot have Christian funerals. And they tell their family members they're going to burn in hell for all eternity.
That's not okay. That's not okay at all. That's really not okay. I don't like that. I don't like anything about that, and I don't like that happens. Where can you be buried then? Like in a non-faith cemetery? What if you have family members that are buried in that cemetery? You can't be buried next to them? That's not okay.
It's just an example of where the stigma against people with mental illness continues into their death. That person is now dead. Let's be clear. They're dead. It's over. They're dead. And we're still stigmatizing their behavior. We're still telling their family members that this person is bad. And here's the concept that I have trouble wrapping my mind around. In Christianity, we have this belief that you cannot sin accidentally. Sinning has to be willful. You have to want to do it. The second thing that we have is that anything can be forgiven. Literally anything can be forgiven. Remember, Christians aren't perfect. They're just forgiven.
Right.
Yet
God
for some reason, when it comes to mental illness, you did it on purpose and you can't be forgiven. The end.
God always forgives. God always forgives. That's what I learned. God always forgives.
Listen, if you talk to the majority of Christian faith leaders that believe this kind of thing, that believe that people who die by suicide cannot have church funerals, cannot be buried in their church cemetery, they firmly believe that a murderer can be redeemed. That a murderer on death row has a better shot at redemption than a person who dies by suicide because of mental illness. And that's just so incredibly sad, because let's back that up a couple of steps. If that's their belief after you die, imagine what their belief is while you were alive. Let's talk about some of the horror stories that we've heard there. We know a woman who suffers from schizophrenia, childhood schizophrenia. She started showing symptoms at age 14. And when she was 17 years old, she was given a 3-day exorcism to treat schizophrenia.
Right.
Can you imagine the trauma?
I can't, and I can't believe that she went through that. And then, no, I can't imagine the trauma because it's so absurd. I can't imagine what she went through.
And now she's, 35 years old and she's okay. I mean, she still lives with schizophrenia, but could you imagine if she would have thought that it worked and would have wandered around saying, I'm cured now? So she'd be a person living with schizophrenia, untreated, except she now believes wholeheartedly that she's cured. So she wouldn't be seeking help because after all, God cured her. Thankfully, that did not happen. She realized it didn't work, got help, and now because of things like, medication and therapy and medical intervention and coping skills and experience, she's living a good life. But what if she would have believed the church? What if she would have believed that the exorcism worked? Oh my God, could you imagine?
Yeah. Something I was reading online was when this Orthodox family was speaking to a psychiatrist, and the father, this Orthodox man, was yelling at his daughter who was schizophrenic, and he was saying to her, obey the 5th commandment, honor thy father and mother, honor thy father and mother. You are not obeying the 5th commandment. And she's schizophrenic, and she's just laying there, just sitting there, just being schizophrenic, not understanding. And he's just yelling, honor thy father and mother. You are not obeying the 5th commandment. And she can't. She's schizophrenic. So what is she supposed to do? He's not understanding. She's not understanding. What's supposed to happen? You can't just bring God into it when it's mental illness.
And what is scary to consider is that the father in that scenario, one, is not being malicious, not being bad. He really does believe that this is the solution, and he believes it because it's ordained by God. He believes that he is following the Almighty and just yelling at his sick daughter. This isn't an example of somebody being mean or malicious, but it's an absolute example of somebody being ignorant and not understanding how medicine works. And can you imagine if you removed schizophrenia and changed it with cancer? Stop having cancer. Obey your 5th commandment. Stop having cancer. You're not obeying your mother and father. Be cured of your cancer. Doesn't that sound ridiculous?
Yes, it absolutely does sound ridiculous.
But when you replace cancer with schizophrenia, people are like, well, if she'd listened, she'd have a better life.
This is an example of where we need medical intervention and not just religious intervention. So honoring thy father and my mother, and by not doing that does not mean you're not following religion. It means you need medical help.
And this is the problem when religion permeates a culture, because so many people, when I teach classes, I'm like, okay, if somebody is having a mental health crisis, where can they go? And we get examples that are really good. You can call 911, you can go to a psychiatrist, you can go to a psychologist, but somebody always says, priest, rabbi, spiritual leader, minister, and it's so hard to give pushback because they think that I'm being disrespectful to religion, and I'm not. A priest, a rabbi, a minister, they're all excellent for your spiritual needs, but they're not doctors. Religion has a lane that it needs to stay in. And again, I know that God is always in our hearts and we carry him with us, and it really does permeate our culture, but nobody would think it was okay to refuse treatment to an 8-year-old with leukemia because everybody is praying. They would think that that was horrible. But yet, for some reason in our society, we have religious leaders right now that are trying to pray the symptoms of mental illness out of people. And it's incredibly dangerous. And we know a woman who lives with severe bipolar disorder that was on her medication that was stable, and she was going to church to improve her life. And when the minister found out, told her to stop taking all of her meds because God had cured her. And she believed him. And within a few months, she went right to crisis where she could have died, and it took her another couple of years to be stabilized. Think of the damage that caused her. And she's now fine. Everything is okay. All of my examples, everybody is living well. But can you imagine if she had died by suicide in those couple of years? Nobody would have blamed religion. Nobody would have blamed the minister. They all would have blamed her. They would have said that she was a bad person that couldn't be buried in their cemetery, and her family would be left to suffer without the supports of the religious community. And these are the things that we need to change.
Dude, even more so than that, even bringing up cancer, I had a cousin living in Israel, older than me, in her 60s. She did not believe in modern medicine, and she got cancer, so she believed in praying away the cancer. She's dead.
And I don't think that anybody hearing that story expected it to end any other way.
Yeah.
But if you remove cancer and replace it with bipolar disorder, everybody's like, well, how did it turn out? How the fuck did you think it turned out? The message that I just want to leave everybody with, and I'm so sincere about this, nobody is saying there's anything wrong with religion, but religion is not a cure or even a treatment for mental illness. It is possible that it could be one of the tools that you use to cope with your life, because it is a coping mechanism.
It is. I do have my Western Wall story where I do believe God spoke to me. People can think whatever they want, but I do believe I had a divine moment at the Western Wall in Israel. I do believe. And
I am not going to disavow you of that notion unless you said that God told you that he cured your schizophrenia and to stop taking your medication.
Did not have, that was not what was said.
But you live with schizophrenia and you have psychosis. And sometimes you hear voices. How do you know which ones are delusions and auditory hallucinations and which ones are God advising you?
I touched that wall, closed my eyes, thought about some stuff, and then all of a sudden I felt a power go shooting through my head, shooting through my arms, and into the wall. Nothing like that has ever happened to me before, and I never had a more moment of complete clarity in my life.
Thank you for sharing that. And that makes sense to me. I mean, as much as it can. You know, I wasn't there. I did not experience this. I'm not pro or con what you're saying. I believe you, and I respect what you went through. But, you know, to play devil's advocate and to kind of be a dick for a minute, what if you told me that God told you that you're supposed to vape? Or that God told you that you're supposed to drink? Or that God told you to stop taking your meds?
It was positive. I was positive. I was thinking, what's the most important thing I need to do? I'm at the Western Wall.
Okay, forget about the Western Wall. Forget about the Western Wall. You have had dozens of years of auditory hallucinations and delusions. You are a schizophrenic. You live with schizophrenia. You have all of the hallucinations and delusions that come with that diagnosis. How do you know that all of them are not God?
Because I know they're not.
How?
They're not. Because I just know.
So we have friends who live with schizophrenia. What would you, Michelle Hammer, say if one of those friends said, hey, this morning God spoke to me and God told me to stop taking my medication?
I would say you should still take your medication anyway.
But God told her not to.
That's different.
Why would God lie to her?
They were not at the
Okay,
Western
stop
Wall.
saying the
That's
Western Wall.
detrimental.
How do people separate the difference between auditory hallucinations and the voice of God in their head? That's the question. Leave the Western Wall out of it.
Because how is it going to benefit your life? I think if God is going to benefit your life in some way, I think God would only speak to you to benefit
But the
your
Lord
life.
works in mysterious ways. You don't know how it's going to benefit until you obey the word of God in your head and stop taking your pills like he so commanded. In his gentle and loving way.
Did he come to you in a burning... Was it a burning bush? Did the burning bush tell
That's an
you?
STD.
Tell you,
That's a completely different thing.
Moses, I shall part the Red Sea, Moses.
Listen, we can absolutely go on forever with this line, but it is a problem. It is a real problem. Imagine that you're a 25-year-old woman who was raised very religious, or a 25-year-old man who is raised very religious, and you have had, visions and hallucinations and delusions your entire life. What if one of them you mistake for God? It's not like he signs his emails. How do you know? This is a real problem for people. Sincerely. In the research for this show and in talking to people, people told me, they're like, I thought my delusions were God. I thought God was telling me to quit my job because it was in my best interest. But all that happened is I lost my job. God told me to leave my wife. These are all real stories that I'm looking at of people who thought they were doing God's will. But in actuality, they were responding to an hallucination and a delusion. How were they to know?
I think God would only tell you to do things that are positive in your life. I don't think God would try to do something detrimental in your life. I think that's the difference. I think a negative voice would not be God. I only think something positive would come from a God voice, in my opinion. That's my opinion.
And further, to go back to your Western Wall story, it wasn't just a voice that you heard. It was an all-encompassing feeling all over your body, from the tip of your toes to the top of your head. You knew. There was no doubt in your mind. It wasn't, you were pretty sure. It was the only thing that felt that way and the only thing that ever felt that way.
Yes.
I know that a lot of people described with their hallucinations and their delusions and all of the stuff they were going through with schizophrenia, that they were picking and choosing. That, this one is a delusion, this one is an auditory hallucination, this one is a visual hallucination. Oh, look, this one's from God. But in reality, all of them were exactly the same. They just decided for whatever reason that this one was from God. And that was an excellent indicator for them that it wasn't. It was just part of their illness process. And they worked with their doctors and they found faith leaders who understood mental illness and didn't overstep their bounds. And that's really what we're getting at, right? We just want faith to stay in its lane. We want religion to stay in its lane. We don't let doctors preach the word of God. Why are we letting religious people give us medical advice? There's nothing wrong with either side until they cross over. And that's what we want people to do to be well, because some of these are scary. And I only use the ones where everybody turned out completely okay. Everybody is completely okay. Thank you all. They've all gone on to lead great lives, and they all say the same thing. Religion has its place, but not in the treatment or cure of mental illness.
Agreed. I agree with that. Religion has its place. Take everything in a positive light. Don't bring yourself down if you think you're not obeying the laws of the 10 Commandments. You're okay. Just because you have a mental illness does not make you some sort of, demon in God's eyes. You're all good. You're not a bad person if you have a mental illness. You are not afflicted by the sins of God or anything like that. You're good, okay? You're good.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this week's episode of A Bipolar, a Schizophrenic, and a Podcast. My name is Gabe Howard. I live with bipolar disorder, and Michelle Hammer, who is a kick-ass artist, lives with schizophrenia. I'd say look behind her and see all of her great art, but this podcast is an auditory hallucination. We will see everybody next week.
The Western Wall.
You've been listening to A Bipolar, a Schizophrenic, and a Podcast. If you love this episode, don't keep it to yourself. Head over to iTunes or your preferred podcast app to subscribe, rate, and review. To work with Gabe, go to gabehoward.com. To work with Michelle, go to schizophrenic.nyc. For free mental health resources and online support groups, head over to psychcentral.com. The show's official website is psychcentral.com/BSP. You can email us at show@psychcentral.com. Thank you for listening, and share widely.
Michelle, what was the name of that wall?
The Western Wall! The Western Wall!